The man standing in the lobby of Crestline Energy Solutions did not look like someone who was about to change everything. He was wearing a jacket that had seen better winters, carrying a manila folder that had been handled too many times, and he had grease under his fingernails that no amount of scrubbing had fully removed. His name was Joel Maddox, and he had driven 40 minutes in a truck with a cracked heater to be there. He had not come to cause trouble. He had come because the law said he had the right to submit his documentation directly, and because 3 certified letters sent to Crestline over the previous 6 weeks had gone unanswered in a way that was not accidental. The receptionist at the front desk was professional in the way that people are professional when they have been trained to recognize who belongs in a building and who does not. She looked at Joel the way you look at weather through a window. Present, noted, not particularly relevant. He told her he was there to submit a formal contractor dispute filing under the terms of the service agreement signed between Crestline Energy Solutions and Maddox Mechanical in March of the previous year. He placed the folder on the desk and asked her to log it as received. She told him he would need an appointment. He said he understood that, but explained that the agreement included a provision for direct submission during the formal dispute window, and that window closed in 4 days. She asked him to take a seat. He took a seat. He sat in that chair for 31 minutes. He knew because he watched the clock above the elevator bank. He was a man who paid attention to time. When you are the only parent of a 9-year-old girl, when you have a shop to run and a mortgage that does not care about your feelings, time is not abstract. Time is everything. When the elevator opened and Randall Croft stepped out, Joel recognized him immediately. Randall Croft was the kind of man whose photograph appeared in regional business publications under words like visionary and disruptive and influential. He was the founder and CEO of Crestline Energy Solutions, a company that had grown in 12 years from a small petroleum services outfit in eastern Texas into something with offices in 4 states and contracts with municipal governments across the Southwest. He wore clothes that were chosen to look effortless. He did not look effortless. He looked like a man who had decided a long time ago that other people existed in a supporting role. He was in the middle of a conversation with 2 men in suits when he noticed Joel. He stopped, not because Joel was threatening, not because Joel was loud. He stopped because something about the sight of a man sitting in his lobby with a manila folder and grease under his fingernails offended him in a way he did not bother to conceal. He said, loud enough for the lobby to hear, that he did not know who had let a walk-in off the street sit in his reception area for the better part of an hour. The receptionist began to explain. Randall Croft raised one hand slightly. He did not need the explanation. He looked at Joel and asked him what he wanted. Joel stood. He was not a short man. He was 43 years old, built from years of physical work, and he had spent enough time under machinery in confined spaces that small discomforts did not particularly register. He looked at Randall Croft directly and said he was there to file a contractor dispute under the terms of the service agreement, that he had sent 3 prior notices by certified mail, and that he was within his legal window to submit in person. Randall Croft looked at him for a moment. Then he smiled. It was a particular kind of smile. The kind that does not reach the eyes because it is not trying to. It is the smile of a man who finds something mildly entertaining that he has already decided does not matter. He said Joel should have thought about that before his crew walked off a job site and cost Crestline $40,000 in scheduled delays. Joel said his crew had not walked off. His crew had stopped work because Crestline's site manager had failed to comply with 3 safety requirements that were specified in the contract and required by OSHA regulation, and that continuing work under those conditions would have exposed his men to documented risk. Randall Croft turned to one of the men beside him and made a sound that was almost a laugh. The other man smiled on cue. He told Joel that was a very interesting story, and that his legal team had already prepared a response to that particular narrative, and that Joel was welcome to pursue whatever avenue he thought was available to him, and that he should understand very clearly what those avenues looked like for a one-man operation going up against a company with 11 attorneys on retainer. Joel did not raise his voice. He said he understood perfectly. He said he just needed the documents received and logged. Randall Croft told the receptionist to call building security. He said Joel had refused to leave private property after being asked, and he said it at a volume intended for the people in the lobby, not for Joel. There were perhaps a dozen people who had slowed or stopped. A few of them looked away when Joel glanced in their direction. Security arrived within 4 minutes. Joel did not resist. He stood very still while the guard explained that he would need to leave the premises. He asked calmly whether the documents could be accepted first. The guard said that was not his call. Joel nodded. He picked up his folder, and before he walked toward the door, he placed a single sheet of paper on the reception desk, face up, visible to anyone standing nearby, and set his business card on top of it. The sheet of paper was a copy of the submission he had attempted to file. The business card had his name and the name of his shop. It was the act of a man who had nothing to hide and wanted the fact of it visible. Randall Croft watched him go. He was still smiling. His people were already moving toward the elevator. One of them said something quiet, and the others nodded. The morning had gone as expected. A small annoyance, efficiently handled. By afternoon, no one would remember the name Maddox. What Randall Croft did not know, because he had not considered it worth knowing, was the shape of Joel Maddox's life. Joel had grown up in Abilene, the second of 3 sons of a man who repaired farm equipment and a woman who worked dispatch for a trucking company. He had learned to take apart an engine before he learned to drive one. He had a natural intelligence for systems, the kind that does not show up well on standardized tests, but allows a person to walk into a mechanical problem and understand it the way a doctor understands a patient. Not just what is broken, but why. He had built Maddox Mechanical over 14 years. It had started as 2 guys and a van doing HVAC work on residential properties. It had grown, slowly and without shortcuts, into a licensed contractor operation with 12 employees, industrial certifications, and a client list that included the county hospital, 2 school districts, and a regional airport. He had done this while raising his daughter, Penny, alone. Penny's mother, Christine, had died 4 years earlier, pancreatic cancer, which is the kind that does not give you much warning and does not respond well to wanting things to be different. Christine had been 38. Penny had been 5. Joel had sat in rooms that smelled like antiseptic and held his wife's hand, and then he had gone home and made his daughter breakfast and put her on the school bus, and then he had sat in his truck in the parking lot of his shop and put his forehead on the steering wheel. He had not fallen apart because Penny needed him not to. He had continued. The Crestline contract had been a significant expansion for Maddox Mechanical. The job involved mechanical systems installation and maintenance across a new pipeline monitoring facility outside Lubbock. It was a 14-month engagement with specific deliverables, safety requirements, and payment schedules. Joel had reviewed the contract carefully. He had flagged 2 clauses he found ambiguous and requested clarification before signing. He had kept copies of everything. This was a habit Christine had taught him. She had been the organized one. Files, dates, documentation. She kept records the way some people keep grudges, thoroughly, without fail, forever. After she died, Joel had adopted the habit in her memory, and then in the memory of what it had cost him not to have documentation in a billing dispute 3 years before her diagnosis. He kept records because the world rewards those who can prove what happened. The safety issues at the Crestline site had emerged in month 8. 3 specific deficiencies: inadequate ventilation in a confined space work area, a bypass that had been installed around a required pressure relief system, and a documentation failure that meant 2 of his crew members were operating without the required site-specific safety training that Crestline was contractually obligated to provide. Joel had flagged all 3 in writing. He had given site management 10 days to respond. When the response came, it was a letter from a Crestline attorney suggesting the deficiencies were either fabricated or overstated and that continuing to delay work would constitute breach of contract. Joel had stopped work. He had immediately filed a report with OSHA. He had contacted 2 former supervisors at Crestline, men he had met during the bidding process who had since left the company, and asked them carefully whether what he was seeing was unusual. Their answers were not what he had hoped for. One of them suggested he talk to a woman named Patricia. He stopped himself. He had made a call, and then he had waited. The OSHA inspector who arrived at the Lubbock site. 11 days after Joel's report was a man named Desmond Frey, who had been doing this work for 22 years, and who had developed, over that time, a reliable sense for the difference between a contractor complaint filed out UPSP and one filed because something was genuinely wrong. He walked the site. He took photographs. He reviewed the documentation that Joel had submitted with his original complaint, which was thorough, sequential, and included timestamps. The pressure relief bypass was real. The ventilation deficiency was real. The training documentation gap was real. Frey issued citations on all 3. 2 of the citations were classified at the serious level. 1, the pressure relief bypass, was classified as willful, meaning it was not an oversight but a deliberate decision to circumvent a required safety measure in order to reduce costs and keep the schedule moving. The proposed penalties were significant. More significant was what a willful OSHA violation meant for a company holding multiple municipal contracts in states where such violations were grounds for contract review. Joel had known this, not because he was vindictive, because he had read the relevant regulations when the issues first appeared, the same way he read everything when something in the system did not work the way it was supposed to. He had not, when Randall Croft laughed at him in the lobby of Crestline's offices, made a scene. He had not threatened. He had not raised his voice. He had placed his documents on the desk, left his card, and walked out. What he had done, before walking into that lobby, was spend 4 months building a record. The certified letters were part of it, 3 of them, sent to Crestline's legal department and Randall Croft's office directly. Each one a formal notice of the contractor dispute, each one requesting acknowledgement and response within the terms of the agreement. The lack of response to all 3 was itself a documented fact. It established a pattern. It established intent. He had also, through a contact he had made during the OSHA process, connected with 2 other former Crestline contractors who had experienced similar disputes. Both had signed agreements in exchange for settlements that included non-disclosure clauses. Both had felt, privately, that they had settled because they could not afford not to. One of them had passed along, without disclosing confidential information, a name. The name was Harriet Bowl. Harriet Bowl was an assistant district attorney in Tarrant County who had, over the prior 18 months, been quietly building a case involving fraudulent billing practices in county infrastructure contracts. She had been looking, without yet finding, a thread that connected several anomalies in Crestline's municipal contract documentation to a broader pattern of invoice manipulation. She had a great deal of paperwork. She did not yet have a contractor willing to speak on record. Joel had called her office 6 weeks before walking into Crestline's lobby. He had walked into that lobby knowing what was coming. Not with anger, not with the hot satisfaction of a man planning a scene, with the particular calm of someone who has done everything correctly, documented everything thoroughly, and is now simply completing a formal step in a process that is already in motion. When Randall Croft laughed at him, Joel had already spoken to Harriet Bowl twice. When the security guard walked him to the door, Joel's OSHA complaint had already resulted in 1 willful citation and 2 serious citations. When he set his business card on the reception desk next to his submission copy, the name Maddox was already in a case file in the Tarrant County District Attorney's office. He drove home. He picked up Penny from her after-school program. She showed him a drawing she had made in art class, a house with a tree in front and two figures standing outside it, one tall and one short. She told him the tall one was him and the short one was her. He folded it carefully and put it in his jacket pocket. She asked him if something was wrong. He said no. He said everything was fine. He said they stop for groceries because he was going to make her favorite pasta with the sauce from scratch, the way Christine used to make it, which he had learned to replicate over 3 years of trial and error, until Penny had told him one evening, very seriously, that it tasted right now. She held his hand in the parking lot. He did not think about Randall Croft. The OSHA citations became public record. That was the nature of willful violations. They were published. Regional news outlets, covering energy and infrastructure, picked up the story within a week of the citations being finalized. One outlet, investigating further, discovered that the Lubbock facility was not an isolated case. A facility in New Mexico operated by a Crestline subcontractor had received a safety citation 2 years earlier that had been resolved quietly. A former Crestline employee, speaking on background, described a management culture in which schedule pressure consistently overrode safety protocol, and in which employees who flagged concerns were reassigned or let go. The story grew. It grew because Harriet Bull's office, which had been moving quietly, was now able to move less quietly. 2 of the invoicing anomalies she had identified were directly connected to the Lubbock facility. One of them involved billing a county authority for materials and labor that documentation, including documentation from Maddox Mechanical's own records, showed had never been delivered or performed. A grand jury was convened. This was not announced. Grand jury proceedings are not public, but the fact of subpoenas being served to Crestline's financial department is the kind of thing that travels. It traveled through the kind of people who pay attention to such things. It reached a reporter at the Dallas Morning News who had been covering Crestline's municipal contract wins for 2 years and had written, without quite saying so directly, that the wins seemed to arrive with unusual consistency in counties where Crestline had donated to local campaigns. The reporter filed a public records request, and then a second one, and then a third. By the time Randall Croft's attorneys were aware of the full shape of what was forming, it had already formed. The grand jury had heard testimony. The DA's office had filed charges, 5 counts of fraudulent billing related to municipal contracts, 2 counts of submitting falsified safety documentation to a regulatory agency, and 1 count of conspiracy. Randall Croft's name was on all of them. He was taken into custody Thursday morning. His attorneys had negotiated a surrender. He was not handcuffed in his lobby. He was not subjected to a perp walk. He was a man with resources, and his resources had cushioned the mechanics of his arrest without changing the substance of it. He walked out of his attorney's office and into a waiting car and was processed in a way that was orderly and quiet. None of that changed what the charges said. None of it changed the fact that the case against him rested, in significant part, on a paper trail that began with a contractor named Joel Maddox who had documented 3 safety violations, sent 3 certified letters, filed an OSHA complaint, and then driven 40 minutes in a truck with a cracked heater to hand-deliver paperwork to a lobby where a man with 11 attorneys on retainer had laughed at him. Joel heard about the charges on the radio driving to a job site. He pulled over. He sat with the engine running for a moment, not because he needed to. He was not a man who needed scenes. He pulled over because the moment felt like it deserved a moment. He thought about the 3 certified letters with their return receipts, filed in a manila folder in the filing cabinet. Christine had bought at an office liquidation sale 8 years before her diagnosis. He thought about the OSHA inspector walking the site and taking photographs. He thought about Harriet Bull, who had a flat, efficient manner on the phone, and who had thanked him, without excessive warmth, for his willingness to speak on record. He thought about the morning in the lobby, Randall Croft in his effortless clothes, the smile that was not for Joel, but for the people watching, the security guard walking him to the door. He thought about setting the folder on the desk, his business card on top, face up. He pulled back onto the road. He had 3 men waiting for him at a mechanical systems job at a middle school outside Odessa. The HVAC unit in the gymnasium was running 8 degrees off, and the school had a game that Friday. It was a real problem with a solution that he knew how to find, and his crew was good, and the work needed to get done. He called Penny's school to check that she was having a good day. The office assistant said she was, and that Penny had won the class spelling bee that morning. He said thank you. He put the phone down. He drove. The charges against Randall Croft moved through the system over the following months with the slow, dense weight of serious criminal proceedings. 2 of his senior executives entered plea agreements. The documentation in the DA's case was described by a legal analyst quoted in the morning news as unusually comprehensive, a word that, in that context, meant that the evidentiary record was difficult to challenge because it had been assembled carefully, over time, by people who understood what would later need to be proven. One of those people was a mechanic from Abilene who kept records the way his wife had taught him. Maddox Mechanical did not emerge from the dispute unscathed. The 14 months of the Crestline contract had been followed by 8 months of delayed payment, legal threats, and the kind of professional uncertainty that makes it difficult to bid on new work. 2 of Joel's employees had left during that period for more stable positions. Joel had taken no salary for 5 of those months. He had made the mortgage. He had kept the lights on. He had made the pasta from scratch on Fridays. In the 12 months following the charges, 4 new clients contacted Maddox Mechanical for bids. 2 of them referenced, directly, having read about Joel in coverage of the Crestline case. They used words like integrity and professional, and one of them, a facilities manager at a hospital system, said simply that they were looking for contractors who kept good records. Joel said that was something he believed in. He got the contract. He hired 2 people to replace the ones who had left, and 1 additional technician he had been wanting to bring on for years, a young woman named. He paused over that thought. He had learned to be careful about names, about the small records that accumulate into a life. Her name was her own. Her work was excellent. She had grown up in a family of electricians, and she had a natural understanding of how systems connect to other systems, which was, in Joel's experience, the rarest thing. Penny turned 10 that spring. She had decided she wanted a cake that was half chocolate and half lemon because she could not decide between them and had concluded, with the particular logic of someone who has recently learned long division, that both halves was mathematically the solution to the problem of choosing. Joel made it himself. He looked up the recipe. He made 2 batches and assembled them carefully. He brought it to the kitchen table where Penny was sitting with 2 friends from school and his own mother, who had driven in from Abilene for the weekend, and when Penny saw the cake she put both hands over her mouth the way Christine used to do when something surprised her in a good way. He noticed it. He did not say anything about it. He cut the cake. Randall Croft was convicted on 4 of the 5 counts. The 5th was dismissed on a technicality that his attorneys had worked for months to construct. He was sentenced to 6 years, of which he would likely serve between 4 and 4.5 with good behavior. His company was placed under a compliance monitor as a condition of the settlements reached in the parallel civil proceedings. 3 municipal contracts were terminated. 2 others were renegotiated under terms that were substantially less favorable. His empire still existed, technically, parts of it. The way a house still exists after a fire has taken the upper floor and most of the roof. You can point to it and say it is there. You cannot say it is what it was. Joel read the sentencing coverage on his phone during a lunch break. He was sitting in the cab of his truck outside the middle school in Odessa, where Maddox Mechanical had been awarded a 2-year maintenance contract. His crew was inside. The gymnasium HVAC was running correctly. The school had won that Friday game. He read the article once. He put his phone in his pocket. He thought about the lobby, the smile, the way the security guard had walked him to the door as if he were a weather event. Acknowledged, managed, moved along. He thought about the sheet of paper he had placed on the desk, face up, his card on top. He thought about Penny's drawing, the tall figure and the short one, standing in front of a house with a tree. He had put it on the refrigerator when they got home that night. It was still there, held by a magnet shaped like the state of Texas that Christine had bought at a rest stop on a road trip they had taken, the year before she got sick. The colors in the drawing had faded a little. The figures were still standing. He finished his lunch. He went back to work,